Thank you very much. So, welcome to this meeting of the Wye Catchment Nutrient Management Board, held on Wednesday, the 16th of October. I'm Councillor Elizabeth Swinglehurst, Chair of the Board. We have a lot of people joining online today because of the weather. Welcome, everyone joining online. And we also have some stout souls that have managed to make it into the meeting for a face-to-face, so welcome also. Fire and emergency evacuation for those present in the meeting room. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for the meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. For those stout souls who are in the room, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak. And when you get to speak, use the right-hand button of the microphone and turn it off when you finish, otherwise the other microphones won't work. And please ensure that your mobile phones and everything else are turned to silent. We have no members of the public present. Those joining us online, if you can use your virtual hand, that would be great. I'll do my best to keep an eye on the screen so that we don't miss any of you wishing to speak. Right, so moving swiftly on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. I think we will just leave the clerk to record those joining online because clearly that's quite a large number of you. But we did have apologies from Emma Johnson from Natural England, Stuart Smith from the Wye Salmon, but hopefully we have Gordon Green, and Martin Williams from Farm Herefordshire. Have we got any other apologies that we're aware of? And do we know if Simon Evans has joined online?
Mr. Evans hasn't joined us just yet, no.
Okay, all right. Well, if he doesn't appear, we'll put that down as an absence because he had warned us that that would be the case. Okay, so the minutes of the previous meeting are included in the agenda. Matters arising. We have had a communication from DEFRA, which I'll read into the minutes later on as we look at their letter. Other matters arising. There was a request in that meeting, as I recall, from Councillor McDermott, I think, for a briefing or a précis of the work of the board, which was going to be taken away to the SOG for a consideration by Claire Minette. So did we do that? I see Anne Weed, you've got your hand up, Anne.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks. No, I just wanted to raise a point just about the minutes and the attendees that are recorded on the minutes. Sorry, so it's a separate point to not the one you're raising. It just looks like you're only recording people who were present in the room on the July minutes.
Right.
So I'm just wondering whether that can be amended to also incorporate all those people that joined in July online.
Yes, that's fine. I can do that. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay. So yeah, Claire, did you manage to have a think in the SOG about putting a summary together for people joining the board?
That's right. It's in the SOG meeting notes.
Okay.
I don't attend the SOG. Emma does.
Okay.
So Mark, I didn't know if you wanted to talk more about that point in terms of what the action at the SOG was, but it is noted and detailed in the SOG meeting notes.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. And I don't have anything else from matters arising. Oh, just we did have in the presentation about biosolids that Tom Powell had said that the Welsh Water could provide copies of the paperwork to show the different mapping risks, and I wonder if we were picking up on that and sharing that with EA and other partners who might find that information useful.
Yes, we're pulling that together at the moment, and we'll be sharing it with the board when everything's ready.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, that's all I've got for matters arising, unless anyone else has got anything. And with the proviso of that correction, as requested by Anne Weedy, are we content with the minutes? Please show your hand. Whatever. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Questions from members of the public? I haven't jumped forward to, have I? No, we're good. Okay, question. We did have a question from Helen Hamilton. And I think, Martin Quine, you'll respond verbally in this meeting, but there'll be subsequent response. Okay.
Yeah, so the question that we received is also supported by further correspondence we've had, and it's in relation to a request for the Environment Agency and working with NRW to update the refocus study. And this is based upon, perhaps since that initial report was commissioned, a lot has changed and a lot more understanding has sort of come to the table. So the Environment Agency have been working with the Lancaster University team who are instrumental in that report. There's a second report that was probably around 18 months ago, and we're still working with them now on a third A and a third B iteration. Now the current work we're working on focuses on the understanding around subsoil migration. So what we understand is that nutrients applied historically and over applied in the Wye Catchment can potentially migrate to subsoils, and it's about better understanding how nutrients enter the river, and that will help perhaps better understand perhaps what farmer methods could help reduce that legacy build up, because we often talk about legacy, and I think many of us don't understand really what that legacy piece is because it's almost new ground. Now, in terms of the latest request, and it is very much funding dependent, we don't have any funding specifically for a further study. We have contacted the Lancaster team with the questions that have been raised, and once we have received a response, we're happy to provide a further update to the board to see where we go with it next. It's fair to say we feel the questions that have been raised are valid, and once we have a bit more of a background and update, we're happy to share that further. But at the moment, we don't have any specifics because of the time we've got to look into it, and it's quite a complex request in terms of the broader detail we need to unpick.
That's great. Thank you. We look forward to having that. You know, as the response becomes possible, share it with the board. That would be great because it is a good question. And thank Helen Hamilton for raising it. Claire Minette.
Yeah, so just to follow on from that, because Helen obviously also raised a question with Natural England, and again, we would like to, I think we need to clarify the amount of time we have to answer these questions. That would be something helpful for the board we could do. So we will provide an update by the end of this week. But in terms of a verbal update, the question asked was around our nutrient neutrality advice in light of the new research around algal blooms from Cardiff University. So just in terms of a verbal update, I suppose my first point is to remind all that the nutrient neutrality advice only applies to the lug catchment. It doesn't apply to the Wye catchment because the lug is exceeding its phosphate targets for water and the River Wye isn't. So nutrient neutrality doesn't apply to the entire of the catchment. So I will refer the question to our nutrient neutrality team, but I would say it's unlikely our advice would change in light of that. And then I think just the point around the research on algal blooms, again, as Martin's indicated, the research and evidence we're gathering is increasing all of the time, and we're constantly reviewing and looking at that data, and we do always apply, although this is the nutrient management board and we do focus our attention on phosphate specifically and nutrients in our wider work and our work with the Wye Catchment Partnership. We always take a holistic approach in terms of those other factors that are impacting the river, such as climate change, flows, you know, again, all that increasing evidence gathering. So I would like to reassure that we do always look at a holistic approach in terms of all the advice and interventions we are taking. But I will take the question away to our national team as well and provide a confirmed answer by the end of the week.
Thank you very much, Richard Tyler.
Thank you, Chair. Just really amplifying on from there, it's quite clear from the Cardiff University research that nitrates particularly are causing far more problems than anybody really realised, although I suppose we all did have our suspicions. And I heard some thinking going on that perhaps it might be sensible to set nitrate targets for rivers like the Wye at probably a UK JNCC level. And I just wondered whether any of our scientific agencies would like to comment on that, and maybe people are discussing it at the moment. I don't know quite what stage we're at.
Yeah, so I think that's something that's kind of long been in the background of our thinking, the mismatch between having an MVZ but measuring phosphate. So do we have any comment? Yeah, Claire, if you want to come back on that, thanks.
Yes, just to say again, it's an extremely valid point. It is something that Natural England is looking at in terms of our targets for rivers in general, and specifically they've looked recently very closely at the Clun, which does have nitrate target, and we're asking them to look very closely at the Wye as well. So I will keep you updated on that. But it's a very live and ongoing discussion in terms of looking at those targets. It is more complex though. Hence, it needs thought and input, but is live with our national specialists. And then obviously they do work closely with JNCC as well on all the national guidance in terms of target setting.
Just come back very briefly on that. Could I ask Anne whether NRW's got a position on this, whether you're engaged in the same conversations?
Yeah, we are engaged in those same conversations, and we spoke last week about the next kind of compliance assessment report that's due out, and that won't just be a compliance assessment report across phosphate. It will be across all the other sort of targets, which does include nitrates. So yes, we are.
And Mary?
Just an observation that if you're looking at reducing nitrites, ammonia, most of them will come from the same source as the phosphates. And so any actions that you take to reduce phosphorus will reduce the N as well. So we need to work out how you capture that. Otherwise, you're going to be coming out with a target and presumably a failure. But then we don't want to redo the actions. Again, we need to work out if those actions are taking place through the DWPP or the catchment plan or whatever plan we eventually get to. We need some way of capturing the nitrogen reductions as well. Otherwise, you're just chasing your tail on the same argument and the same kind of contention through the catchment.
Okay, thank you. So we'll if that's everyone's happy with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is updates on activity. Thank you very much for the update from the Statutory Officer Group. Much appreciated. We haven't got any other updates. I am just going to put a marker down for, if there is activity going on, particularly with partners like Farm Herefordshire and the Wye Catchment Foundation. It'd be really useful to have updates so that we know where actions are being delivered. Okay, so has anyone got any comments that they'd like to raise in respect of the update from the Statutory Officer Group? Mary Albright.
So I've got lots of questions because obviously everybody gave a slide pack with their own agency or organisation's work. What's the best way of doing it? You presumably don't want me to go through the meeting asking the questions. Do I email those agencies directly with my questions, or do I?
No, if you can do it now, because that will bring clarification to everybody.
Okay, so somebody interrupt if I go on a bit.
How long were you planning on taking?
Yeah, it's a long list.
Brace yourselves.
I've got two general questions. When we divided the SOG and the Nutrient Management Board, there was a review kind of trigger put in place, which is 6 months, which I think we've gone past. It would be good to know, are we going to do a review of how it's working? How do we do that? How do we report back to each other on how we feel that it's working? And as kind of a follow-on from that, are the Statutory Officers Group members happy with the progress that is being made under the new format? Do they feel it's a positive change that's moving us forward with regard to plan making, but also somehow determining favourable condition actions? And are there things that they would like to change about how it's currently set up in order to expedite or better use the levers you all have? Personally, I feel that the Nutrient Management Board is a little bit cast adrift, and I don't feel that I have a good handle on the information that you guys are all talking about. It doesn't mean the information isn't happening, it's just I don't feel that the Nutrient Management Board get the detail that we might have otherwise scrutinised and had. Throughout the slide pack, do you want to, shall I wait to answer those, or are those kind of things to...
So, Mark, if you want to come in at this point.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And yeah, hello, Mary. Just to cover off probably the first point that you raised with regards to the review. It may not have been in the actual slide deck, but hopefully you may have seen the supplementary paper that was provided basically from the meeting notes, which just got finalised a bit later after that slide deck came along. But within there, it was discussed at the last SOG meeting around that review. So we want to do our kind of internal review of the group, looking at the terms of reference, looking about how the organisations that make up that group are working together, kind of looking at what's working well, what have we learned so far over the last 12 months. So appreciate I've only just come into this statutory officers group at the start of this year, but my understanding, we have been formulated for just over a year now. So appreciate that 6 months time frame has lapsed. But what we want to then do is seek feedback from the likes of the members of this board as well, in terms of what has worked well. I believe the slide decks are providing useful information along with the sharing of the meeting notes. But any further feedback and comments from the Nutrient Management Board we will seek as well. So we'll pull that all together to kind of give that overall review to make sure that the SOG is still fit for purpose, delivering value and providing the information that you need here at the board.
So is the review ongoing, Mark? Or it needs to be discussed at the next SOG, is what you're saying?
No, so we've agreed that we will do that and have that done in preparation for the next SOG, which is the 18th of December, so 2-3 weeks before the next Nutrient Management Board. So we've aligned SOG meetings that always take place at least 2 weeks before the Nutrient Management Board, so we can provide the papers and updates. So that will happen between now and December. So
do you need the Nutrient Management Board members to email you their thoughts on how it's working?
Yeah, so we'll set that mechanism up, Mary, in terms of back through the Secretariat to seek that feedback, yes.
Thank you. So then I've basically gone through lots of the slide pack, and they're probably very basic questions, but they're just things I think if we could nail them now, then they just mean more when you get that slide pack, because it started off as a really strong slide pack, but I feel like I'm losing kind of connection to it. So with regard to the headline actions, for example, it says the Upper Wye Restoration Project is being adopted, but it doesn't say which of those actions within that restoration project will reduce pollution in the catchment. They haven't been quantified as far as I can see, but also how are we going to capture that work in any of the plans being written? Likewise, it would be great to have more updates on the DWPP. Martin, I know you haven't finished and that Les is a busy man, but the Nutrient Management Board, obviously, it's part of what we're going to be producing as a plan that will have our name on it, and it would be good just to kind of stay kind of aligned to what's happening there. I saw that one of the headlines was lug data. Is this the data that already exists and you're collecting, or are the SOG after more data, and how is that data going to be coming forward? Do you need more testing points? Do you need more money? Whatever it is, surely the Nutrient Management Board needs to know what you mean by we need to focus on lug catchment data. I think I've spoken to Martin about this. I think I understand now, but I couldn't quite work out whether the lug catchment, the lug river is failing and the Wye isn't failing, therefore is the Wye catchment failing? Because obviously we're trying to divide them quite kind of consistently now. It seems to be that the lug is being peeled off to the lug Arrow Froome. Does that mean the Wye catchment is not failing? But I think Martin has answered that for me. So
I think we were getting clarification on that, because clearly what you have is on the Welsh side, it's the Wye is failing, but on the English side it isn't. So if Martin would like to put some detail there.
Yeah, and hopefully I can explain it in sort of the simplest terms. So it's worth pointing out that the main body of the Wye, which is the Wye sack, is a sack in England and Wales. The lug is only a sack in England. So there is a difference between the two. The assessment by Natural England in terms of when the river was downgraded wasn't just on the basis of nutrients. It was other factors, including salmon populations, as well as crayfish and macrophytes, so large sort of plants. And Claire and Anne can cover any detail on that. The difference between the lug and the Wye is that the lug fails also for phosphates. And to a certain extent, there's a lot of conversations around N. Do you cover N? A lot of the measures for N and P will be the same. So effectively, you resolve one, you resolve the other. So consequently, when we're looking at the diffuse water pollution plan, so our review, whilst we're looking at the Wye as a whole catchment, we're also taking it down to the more sub-catchment level. So the main one is the lug, obviously, because we know they've got different issues. So what we know is that the sac of the lug is failing for nutrients. The main Wye isn't. However, the reason why it gets complicated is because if we then go to the main body of the Wye and then the sub-catchment level, we know we've got failures for Water Framework Directive for nutrients. So we've got to be really careful not to give an impression that the Wye is fine, because actually we know there are other nutrient issues that also need to be addressed. The reason why we focus predominantly on the lug as part of the diffuse water pollution plan is because the lug is failing for phosphates. So that's why when we're talking about the diffuse water pollution plan and the next steps, we're predominantly working out what are the measures that we need to put on the lug could be different to the Wye because of the different issues.
Richard Tyler.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from that, I've found the compliant assessment report that NRW did however many years ago it is, 2, 3, very helpful in the sense that it did actually work at a sub-catchment level, where all the data that's presented in public, including these notes, is about Wye as the main river. And I worry about what messages presenting that main stem data alone on phosphate actually gives. Now, we know about nitrogen, the two work together, and we know the place is polluted. You just need to look at it. Are there any plans in EA to actually break down the compliance assessment into the subcatchments beyond, obviously, the lug, sorry?
So in terms of the subcatchment, we already do that for the water bodies under Water Framework Directive. So that data information is available. Now, the reason why we haven't presented it in the SOG update is because we're looking at the reasons for failures for the SAC, which tends to have a higher or tighter target. But in terms of the subcatchment, so we start to move outside of the SAC, that's where we're looking at the Water Framework Directive. So the reasons for failure. So in answer to your question, yes, we do. But the reason why we haven't presented them is because we're predominantly looking at the SAC failures at the moment. However, we have got some people within the EA already providing some visuals on what that looks like, because I think sometimes we end up having lots of information or tables, which actually is better to look at the classifications on more of like a visual document. So we are working on producing that.
Councillor, maybe?
Thanks, Alyssa. I think what this highlights for me again is the need for us within the NMB on the Wye to be able to bring this information together so that we could be looking at what is the condition of the Wye, not what is very interesting and important technical differences about the situation in different parts of the river. What is less important and quite irritating, which is just differences in the way it's measured on different sides of the border, which I think is very confusing for people and be very misleading. So, when you say something like the lug is failing, but the Wye isn't, that means do different parts of the river. But when you say the Wye isn't failing, actually, but you say it's failing in Wales, not in England, what you mean is not that you put a fence in the middle of the river and say on that side it's okay and that side it isn't. It's that there are different standards being set. I think I'm not sure now. I'm just talking myself around in a circle. But if that's the case, then actually, if it's failing on one side, then I'm sure on the other side they wouldn't want to say, oh, but we have lower standards, so we think it's okay. I think you would probably want to say it's also failing here, and perhaps we need to set our standards differently. So, those of us who, and I'm sure I'm like many of my political colleagues, my time is horribly diluted across too many different topics. I find this one particularly important, and so I try to keep on top of it. Almost no one else I know can, who isn't working entirely on rivers, and I think we owe it to our public to be able to assimilate this information in a way that is more comprehensible and more transparent. And I'm sure that our wonderful regulatory body officers here can put their heads together and do that for us. Please. Thank you.
Martin?
Yep, Chair. So just to clarify, and just for clarity, it's not the failures. I'm not suggesting by any means that they're coming from Wales. What just to clarify, the lug is only a sack in England, not in Wales. So just to clarify that piece. So I'm not suggesting that my colleagues across the border there are causing the problems. And I think Anne may talk in a minute about some work that they're doing in Wales to try and understand the phosphate situation, because we do work very closely with Wales. And the work we've done, for example, on source apportionment is also calibrated across the border. And that's also to support organisations like Welsh Water in terms of their consistent approach to water treatment work upgrades. So just to clarify that piece, and essentially we have got differences, but we work collectively across the catchment. And this is why we're trying to build a review of the nutrient management plan for both sides in terms of the diffuse water pollution plan and also the other half, which is for Wales. But Anne may want to cover a bit further.
Yes, Anne, come in.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for taking those words out of my mouth, Martin. So, I mean, the only thing that's clear here is that this is complex, isn't it? This isn't simple and this isn't straightforward. And I think we're all probably learning lessons since the NRW sort of published that report back in 2020 on the phosphate reports back in 2020, and and it's not necessarily the report and the technical data. It's the narrative around what that data is telling us that is really, really important. And I think, we've certainly learnt lessons since 2020, and we're, hoping that we can, roll those lessons out when we publish the next report in January. And that report won't just be on phosphate, it'll be on all the targets for those SAC rivers in Wales, not just the Wye as well. And I think, you were talking, Catherine, about the differences between the targets, on the Welsh side and on the English side. The Wye is sourced in Wales, and those upland stretches, those tributaries, not all of them are SACs. They will have tighter targets because you would naturally expect those parts of the river to be purer and cleaner. So those targets will always be a little bit tighter in those headwaters than they are down in the lower reaches of the Wye. So we do have to have targets that are appropriate to the part of the river that you're on. So I don't think we'll ever have, unique kind of, we'll never have, consistent sort of targets on either side of the river. They will always be a little bit tighter the higher up the watercourse you go. And as far as whether the Welsh Wye is a compliant SAC or a failing SAC, I think there are not all of the Wye tributaries are designated as SAC. So there are a lot of tributaries that are outside of the SAC designation, and there are some stretches of the Wye that's that are fine and that are passing, but there are other sections of the Wye in Wales that aren't. So an understanding at that sub-catchment level is really important for us to sort of target those efforts. And I think just to pick up on another point that I think Mary just mentioned there about the Upper Wye Restoration Programme, and trying to sort of capture the P or the phosphate sort of savings that that project might generate. That project was never designed around phosphate and phosphate failures. That is a project looking at the whole kind of holistic health of the river, because we all know that the river isn't only under pressure when it comes to phosphate or indeed nutrients. This is actually looking at everything. This is looking at flows. It's looking at sort of shade. It's looking at, you know, preventing animals from accessing the river and putting sediment in there. So it's more of a holistic kind of project, not a project designed for this, you know, for this issue around phosphate and the failing stack. So I don't know if that helps.
Sort of, and I think that was my point really, that poaching, river buffers, shading, flows, those are all relevant to what we know about how the Wye is behaving with regard to heavy concentrations of nutrients being triggered by those external sources. So my point was that if the SOG slideshow is going to focus on activities that are not related to producing a nutrient management plan or DWPP, focusing on reducing nutrients, then we need to maybe put that to one side and have it as a this is also happening, not a this is happening to help write the nutrient management plan. I don't know. Because I've obviously read the documents and seen it, but I think there are things in there that people are going to do and potentially be paid to do that I think can be captured as a kind of a good thing, not as a, it's not a criticism. While I've got you, I've got another question for you. Your amended planning guidance that NRW have published is still quite different to Herefordshire's guidance, which is kind of triggered by Natural England's position. It seems to be that when we're talking about ecology, we want to be one catchment and treat it as one catchment. But when we're talking about planning guidance, we do have these two divergent positions. And I'm saying that I believe Natural Resources Wales' position to be correct and fair and based on evidence. And I wonder at some point, would the agencies ever consider putting their heads together and working out why we have two different positions on development within the same catchment? So I'm talking lug. So it would seem a little bit of a madness to have divergent planning guidance when we're trying to get to the same point on everything else. That's a selfish point, but there we go.
Claire, do you want to come in on that?
I was actually going to come in on the point before about monitoring standards across the piece, but I can come to this one first. I was going to put it in the chat, but the chat isn't open. So so to address that point on nutrient neutrality first, I think again Anne might come in, but that is one for DEFRA ministers and our national team. So again, you know, I can take that question back again to our national teams and through DEFRA in terms of their work across border. It's not something we can influence at an area team. We can influence, we can raise the issue, but it's not a policy decision that we can obviously make within the area team bounds. I don't know if Anne, you wanted to add anything on that before I go back to the monitoring.
No, other than to agree with you, Claire.
Okay, yeah, and then just one quick final point on the monitoring across England and Wales, just to I suppose provide some reassurance that the way we assess whether the triple SIs and stacks are failing or not. So when Natural England stated that the wine lug triple SI was in unfavourable declining, that's common standards monitoring guidance, that is UK wide. So we do use the same process across the whole of the UK, and so our national specialists from Natural England meet with NRW and convene at JNCC to arrange that guidance. So just to reinforce and reiterate what Anne said, there will be differences in targets and there will be differences in how that, because of the ecology and the environment of the river is very different in Wales, and therefore the targets are set in accordance to the ecology of the river, but against common standards monitoring guidance, and all that guidance is available. I don't expect anyone to go in and read it, but it is all available on the JNCC website, and is applied quite rigorously. So ultimately the way the river is assessed is the same across the UK.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. I've got loads more. Unless you want me to keep
Loads
going,
more.
or well, not loads, just one per agency. Liz, sorry, Anne, on your slide, you also said environmental permits, the review reductions, the review of the permits have taken place. I think it's 31 that were listed. Can these be quantified in their reductions, or is that something you want Welsh Water to do? But obviously, if we're tightening permits, then they have a reduction value to kind of capture. And I wasn't sure if these were just being reviewed on treatment plants in Wales, or whether that was England as well, whether between you all you can kind of come up with a figure for those permit reviews. It looks as if most of them will be done by 2030, so I think well done to everybody involved in reviewing permits and agreeing to more stringent permits in place. I think that's a huge thing that we probably are glossing over. That's important to note that people have worked really hard to do that, and I think we need to say thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mary. So, so those permit reviews were on the Welsh side. So they are the permits that NRW issue, and you know we've tightened the limits for phosphate discharging from those sewage treatment works above a certain size. Some of those limits, so there, I think I've put a link on the slide. You should be able to access where you've got the full list, and it will show you the actual reductions that we've actually imposed on those permits. And it's some of them are phased, so there'll be an initial reduction that will need to be brought in. Some of them have been brought in already, and then there's a later target of 2030 for a much tighter target to come in. So, I mean, I think I've put the link on the slide. I think if I haven't, then I may have done on an earlier slide, but you should be able to get all that information is available publicly. Whether we can actually quantify what the actual P saving is, I need to take that back, Mary, and just make sure I give you the right information, because I'm not sure.
Thank you. My next one was for Liz, do believe that's okay. Liz, you mentioned that there's a 68% reduction at Luston. Is that better than you had predicted? And is there any way you can quantify it in kilograms? Does it convert to additional credits, or is it 68% is as you thought?
Thanks, Mary. Yes, it's 68% of the 100% modelled by the Wye Foundation. So, and that's over a 2-year period. So we're kind of projecting that it is on track at the moment. And what we're proposing to do is to publish some of the further detail around that. So that'll be available shortly on the website.
Just because I think that kind of information is really useful for other people, whether it be a private wetland or wetlands in Wales, that if we can show that it works, then it's a better chance of being funded and implemented elsewhere.
Yeah, so I'm currently at a conference at Norfolk, actually, where there's been a PhD paper just coming forward on some analysis around phosphorus reduction at several of the other wetland sites, which is kind of providing some very positive information around the kind of efficacy of the wetlands.
So it's another positive news story. You can tell I'm in an optimistic mood today, guys, that I credit where it's due. And sorry, go on.
Sorry, I've got a bit confused. You say it's 68%, that WWF set a target which is now being used as 100%, and you're only achieving 68%. I'm not quite sure how that's success. Perhaps I'm just misunderstanding.
Yeah, so obviously it's got a 2-year period to kind of optimise its, maximise its potential reduction. So at 12 months in of operational, then we are saying that that's actually a positive result, because it's demonstrating that it's the trajectory, it's well on course for meeting that 100% reduction.
This is just a suggestion as well, Liz and Alyssa. We're a Herefordshire Council are hosting another river conference. Advertise it widely, obviously, but I wonder whether the focus, which I think is listed at the moment, is sustainable farming practices, whether it should be river recovery practice, farming practice, because sustainable farming is already undertaken in the catchment. I think most farmers would agree that was where they had pitched their kind of work. That is very different to river recovery farming, which is a position we are in at the moment and what we need to be looking at. I think it just gives a different tone to an event where I think most farmers would say that they are sustainable to their best abilities already.
So that's one that Councillor Swinglehurst and I can take away and have a discussion around.
We'll have a think about that. But it's not. We must remember this is not going to be the last conference that we hold. This is going to be a series every year, so maybe the actually river recovery as a subject might be what we do with the next one, and just focus on that.
Are you sure you want me to keep going?
If you've got more,
I've got more. This goes to the Natural England slideshow, slide pack now. So you mentioned ridge to river and the Wye-scapes, but again, there's no definition of the phosphorus reduction on that. I know they weren't designed to do that, but they will have measures in there that are being funded that will reduce phosphorus. So I think everybody needs to be mindful that their responsibility is to capture that reduction and not just pay the money for something nice to happen. We need to know in technical terms, what did we achieve as an outcome, not just the kind of, you know, the ridge to river is not the outcome. The outcome is what did it achieve? And that's public money as well. So I think it's very important when it's public money that we deliver an outcome, or whoever's responsible for it delivers an outcome.
Do you want me to come back on that one? Is your next question related to landscape recovery? So just to reiterate, I completely agree. Public money, we have to ensure that we're transparent and clear around it. Those are landscape recovery projects. So they're currently only in the 2-year development phase. So they have 2 years of funding to develop the project. So they are still formulating the plan, and then if that development phase is successful, they go into the delivery phase, and part of that development phase is looking at how that significant delivery will be financed as a mixture of public and wider private green investment finance. So we can keep you updated, and at points in the future, I'm sure those projects, especially the Wye-scapes, would like to come and will speak to this board, no doubt, in the future. But just to set realistic expectations, we expect those projects to run then for up to 20 years. So you would want, so that 2-year development phase, they're not quite at the point yet to quantify that level of delivery, but they will do in the future.
I think my point probably, Claire, is to kind of go on from that, is that if they're designed to reduce certain things that we know are a problem in the catchment, my belief is that they're more likely to be funded and to carry on to the 20-year phase. So that's why if you identify particular pressure points, I think they're more likely to be paid for. There's also a mention in the slide pack of whole farm plans, but I wasn't sure if those were what we would call nutrient management plans or nutrient plans. But it strikes me that if, I think also Les and Martin had found that farmers weren't quite aware of where the nutrients might be coming from and where the losses might be experienced, and whether there's any merit, again, in looking at some, producing some theoretical models for typical catchment farms that kind of say, if you do this, this and this, it's likely you're producing XXX, just to put into context for people without them having to spend loads of money assessing their own output. Just kind of give a steer on where the problems might exist, but also in fairness to the people that probably are less of a problem, so they're not making changes or kind of coming out of agricultural activities that they might not need to based on their own farm model. But unless we kind of theoretically account for typical type of farms, none of us will really know. I can do it because I have to do house calculations, but nobody yet, as far as I can see, has ever done a farm or an agricultural application nutrient calculation. I think it would be very interesting and helpful for people to do that. But I might be wrong. It might be that a whole farm plan might well be a nutrient management plan. I don't know.
I'll go away, and I think I know the answer, but I will go away and speak to the people who do those whole farm plans and make sure I get a specific answer for you, Mary, rather than try and answer that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Claire. Don't go anywhere. On your slide pack, it said that you had 38 farm visits, but I didn't know why you were visiting those farms. Is it 38 different farms? Is it because of an enforcement issue, an education issue? And you mentioned 3 topics, but I didn't understand the relevance of saying the percentage of those topics discussed on those farm visits without knowing what the farm visits were for. But were there any outcomes of those farm visits? And is that 38 farm visits out of the 2,500 in the Wye? I think that's you don't have to answer any of those questions. It's more today. It's to say that when you say we undertook 38 farm visits, it means nothing. So either give me the information to say what happened, or maybe leave it out and it's something that isn't relevant to the Nutrient Management Board. Likewise, you mentioned there's 771 hectares of SFI-funded buffer strips. Again, we need it in kilograms of reduction if that's to go into the nutrient management plan or DWP plan. You said there's 22% of land covered by SFI funded soil management plans. To me, when I read that, there's 78% not covered. Why aren't we attracting people to take that opportunity to get the money for things like that? 25% of farmland managed as low input. That's 75% managed as high input. What do we not communicate? What are we missing? Because I presume you put them in as a figure for me to ask these kind of questions, but 75% high input land in the catchment is quite a long way from what we probably would all like to get to. And following on from that, is it possible to quantify the phosphate reductions that are coming through the SFIs, CSF payments and other grants? You know, there's quite a few slurry covers going in and manure covers going in that are grant funded through public money. Why is nobody accounting for the reduction of nutrients being lost for that farm to take the credit, but also to go into this rolling target we've all been scrambling to get to over the last 5 years? And one final thing, because some of these you don't need to answer, I'm just poking around really, but consents and planning is a title on the slide pack, but it just says 28 issued. But I don't know 28 consents and planning for what? And then it says in the same sentence, attendance and engagement at the Walton Farm event. Is that relevant to the consents and planning that were given? Or are they just kind of two sentences that have been accidentally merged together? And what was the Walton Farm event? Again, I know, but if it's going to be in the slide pack, everybody else needs to know as well. So it's just, I presume, really, I'm just asking for more information from the agency through your slide pack, so that if it's relevant, put it in. If it's not, don't worry.
Okay. So first of all, I mean, thanks for that feedback, Mary. It is really, really helpful. And I think some of that context is a wider issue of us trying to condense a lot of information into one slide. So we commit for each of us only to do one slide, so we don't provide barrages of information. But I think what your feedback is suggesting is it might be better to focus on just one thing and give you more of the detail of that one thing, rather than trying to put across the range of work we've done since the last board into a very oversight slide. But I will just pick up on a few of those points. In terms of the visit, they're catchment sensitive farming visits. So Natural England provides visits. So these are visits to farms. That's just the number of visits we've done since the last board meeting, on farm visits where we provide bespoke advice. And we have been doing some work to look at which which SFI actions have been picked up in the Wye, and looking at the trend over the last few years. And I can provide some more detailed work on that in time for the next board meeting that will give a bit more flavour to some of those figures. I think in terms of the concerns, it's around some of those numbers. The reference to low input grassland, that's just in terms of all of the permanent grassland across the Wye. 25% of it is low input. That doesn't mean that the rest is high input, it just means they're not in schemes. So all of this is related to our schemes. So it doesn't mean, and again, 22% of farms having farm management plans, it doesn't mean that other farms don't. It just means they have farm management plans with catchment sensitive farming. And then just finally, on the point around quantifying phosphate, which I know has always been a challenge, it is very difficult to quantify the amount of phosphate reduction from one buffer strip on a particular farm or particular area of land, because obviously you measure that in the river, and the impact can come from multiple sources. But we have, and I have shared previously, the detail in the farm scoper report, which does use modelling to calculate how much those actions we're putting in do mitigate for the river. So the farm scoper report was the one we shared last time, and CSF do obviously do quite detailed monitoring overall around the percentage reductions that many of these offer. So we do have that broader understanding of the impacts and phosphate reductions these actions can deliver, but not at a granular farm level or catchment level. amount, but all of this will be picked up through as well through the DWPP, which reports such as the Farm Scoper report and others feed into.
Thanks, Claire. You don't know what the 28 consents and planning were?
Oh, yes, I do, of course. Sorry, yes. So that's if anyone wants to undertake an action on the River Wye or Lug because it's triple SI, if it's an action that could potentially cause damage on that river, they have to come to Natural England for consent. So we issued 28 of those just since the last board update, and very often those we issue those with sort of mitigating actions or advice to ensure that the river is kept in none of the interest features are going to be damaged. And I focused on the Wharton event. I thought many people might be aware of what that event was, because they've been working very closely with us to ensure that they are balancing the management and maintenance of the riverbanks in terms of pollarding trees and looking at how they manage the riverbanks. And some of them have found the process previously around triple SI consent quite challenging or difficult. And so us and the EA and NFU and that group of farmers have worked closely to ensure there's a really smooth and positive way forward in terms of issuing consent for those landowners who do want to do who do need to do management and maintenance along the river.
Thanks, Claire. Just to clarify, probably for your behalf, you don't mean you've given out 28 consents for actions that will harm the river. You meant that they know. That's what I was reading before. I was thinking, somebody step in. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
So to ensure that the activities people are doing, and it's things like, you know, they might need to. There might be a tree that needs pollarding, and that we obviously, but we want to maintain shade, so we advise on how to pollard it. It might be something like mowing the riverbank because it's the canoe club and they need to do that, and they, because it's triple SI and because it has the greatest protection, they do have to ask our consent before undertaking any activities that could have a damaging effect. And we only issue consent if we're assured that it's not going to have a damaging impact, and we often, in addition to that, will provide them with advice about how to ensure that none of their activities are damaging the river. So that's one of the statutory duties that Natural England undertakes in ensuring the protection of the river.
Thank you, Claire. I guess I'm asking for more detail. We've all been
I'm going to draw a line
deep in
under it
this.
now, though.
Yeah.
So if you need to any more, you can take it out. That's outside the meeting. But I'm just going to say as a general note on the update, since one of the roles of the board is to triangulate actions with delivery of the plan, and we do have a plan, even though we don't have the new plan, but we've got the plan that we've got, which is the phosphate action plan. That actually some ability to quantify and see the benefit in relation to actions and delivery of the plan, it would be helpful to us in order to assess the efficacy of those actions. Otherwise, it becomes a kind of, here's a bunch of cool stuff that we've done. So we kind of need to tie it back to the plan and delivery of the objectives, even if it's not specific, kilograms. But there are objectives, overall objectives that say, well, this is delivering that objective. I think this is particularly challenging for local authorities who are not mainly doing those sort of actions. I think it's less challenging probably for the statutory agencies, but it's particularly disappointing not to have an update. And I believe we're having an update for a number of meetings now from organisations such as Farm Herefordshire, when they are very much charged with delivery of actions where we have the most intransigent difficulty over agriculture. And yet I haven't got any idea of what they're up to or what they've done to deliver the objectives of the current plan, or indeed probably what will be the objectives of the plan that will come through in March. So I don't know if other board members feel equally frustrated that we don't seem to be seeing, because it's, indeed the Wye Foundation, the Wildlife Trust, we have a number of partners on this board who are delivering actual actions that are actually doing good, and yet that's not looping back into the board. So we have no way of knowing whether it's delivering the plan, and our job is to have oversight as to the delivery of the plan, I think. So that would be my overall comment on that. So we're going to let Councillor maybe come in, and then we're going to move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you. You took many of my words out of my mouth there. And excuse me if I keep dropping out. My electricity is going on and off. I think to kind of pick up on what you said about wanting to see the actual outcomes, which also relates back to what Mary was saying about we want to see not just what actions you've taken, but what were the outcomes of those actions. And drawing back to what I was asking before about bringing together the English and Welsh side, my request is that when we see the new revised plans come through by the end of this financial year, please let us not have an English plan and a Welsh plan, and then that's it, and then we don't look at it again for years. Please, can we have a combined plan, and please, can we have an annual report back, not just on the activities that have been taken, but also on the outcomes of those activities set against the targets that we're including in those plans. I'm sorry, I'm sitting here with another hat on. I've been doing project evaluations for large-scale climate change projects, and this fundamental point about the split between what we've tried to do and what we've achieved and what we haven't yet achieved, and therefore we can hone in on those things and why, is just so fundamental. I know this is a really complex area, but I think if we don't do that, we're not doing our job as a nutrient management board. So please, that's my request. We've got 4 months still until the finalisation of those plans. Please, can we have a combined plan with that sort of structure? And then please, can we have a proper annual report back on it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Maybe. So hopefully that's all been heard. Okay, so we're going to move on to agenda item 6, which is taking forward the agreed action from the re-governance process to have a seat on the board for the river, which sounds a bit of an unusual idea, but it's trying to take forward the concept of rights for nature, and that we should have somebody on the board who has no other agenda other than to be the river and to speak for the river. So appended to your agenda papers criteria. If the board agrees those criteria, then we will go out via social media and potentially through other means to see who's out there who might best meet those criteria. So has anyone got any comments on the criteria, any ways in which they feel that they could be improved, changed or added to? So we're broadly in agreement that this is the criteria that we're satisfied with. Yep, okay. So we'll take that as a resolution of the board that we agree the criteria. So that's done number one thing. And we will then take that on with the working group to advertise it more widely and see who's out there. And if anyone's got any suggestions for people who would be appropriate and who they feel would fit the criteria, please feel free to email me or other members of the working group with the suggestion. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 7. To note the response from DEFRA to a correspondence from me. The Cabinet Commission also wrote the response to that is yet to be forthcoming. However, I note in this response that DEFRA state that they're committed to delivering the Environment Act targets, which include reducing nitrogen, phosphorus and sediment losses from agricultural lands. They're committed to review the Environment Improvement Plan and will develop a new statutory plan with delivery plans to meet each of our Environment Act targets. So I'm very excited that we'll have some more plans, because we just haven't had enough of those, and we'll see what that translates into. I thought it might be worth taking a moment to refresh our memories as to what the Environment Act targets are that they're committed to delivering, and they are to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus sediment from agriculture by 40%, by at least 40%, by 2038, which is in fact less than the agreed COP15 target, which was to reduce excess nutrient loss to the environment by at least 50% by 2038. So At least that's a target, and reduce phosphate from wastewater by 80% by 2038. It's interesting that the wastewater target is double that of agriculture, although it's significantly less of a problem in this catchment. And also that 75% of water bodies should achieve good ecological status by 2027, which is the Water Framework Directive target. I have the strongest feeling we won't be making that one. Because currently I think we have 16% and it's in fact 0 if you include chemical pollution, but hey. I did have an update from DEFRA for this meeting, which I will read into the minutes because it came in very late in the day. And it goes as follows: cleaning up our rivers, seas and lakes, including iconic sites such as the River Wye, is a top government priority. DEFRA are actively progressing the next steps for the River Wye. This includes working more closely with all relevant stakeholders, including Welsh Government, local authorities and the various dedicated local groups. The Secretary of State met with the Deputy First Minister for Wales and they discussed the Wye and agreed to work collaboratively on the issues affecting the river. The Secretary of State agreed to enhance scientific research and local field trials to identify solutions that can be applied across wider geographical regions, starting with tackling pollution of culturally and economically important water bodies. DEFRA are reviewing regulations where agriculture may be a factor in causing pollution. These include the rapid review of the Environmental Improvement Plan announced by the Government in July and the post-implementation reviews of the nitrate pollution prevention regulations. DEFRA recently announced the independent review of DEFRA's regulatory landscape by Dan Corrie, and there's a link to that. This will be appended to the minutes, but if you want a copy, I'm happy to share as well. Furthermore, there is a cross-parliamentary group that is forming but hasn't formed, so we'll see where that goes. But that's hopeful from DEFRA. It's nice to get that response and that they're discussing the why. So hopefully will be included in that discussion. And then following on, has anyone got any particular questions or comments on the DEFRA update?
Only one thing, Alyssa. There is a parliamentary cross-party group, the MPs and some Lords that are working on a Wye agenda. Is it worth us, as the Nutrient Management Board or the SOG, approaching that team to see what they're coming up with? Otherwise, we're in the overlap kind of territory. Yeah,
I agree. I think it would be. I mean, I'm not getting a particularly clear line of communication on that. I have to say, and it's a shame because it would be nice if we could all, work together and not have sort of groups of people, setting up again to do what they need. So we'll sort of see. It might be something maybe for a subsequent board meeting to ask a member of the parliamentary group if they're available to come and actually tell us what this is and what they're planning to do and what their thoughts are and how we might work with them and be constructive partners in this, because I think there's a difference between someone who's kind of coming in a bit late in the day, and people who are dealing with this, day to day, every day, at the coalface, as it were. So, and sometimes I feel that that communication isn't as good as it might be.
Can't we propose now to write to them to introduce the Nutrient Management Board as an open receptacle of communication?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that as a proposal. Are we happy with that? Has anyone got any objections? Speak now. Okay, so we can take that as an action, please. And so we've got, I'm going to say Mark Lidderth, and then we'll come to Andrew and then Jackie.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. Yeah, so Mary's just actually mentioned part of what I was going to say, which was about the cross-party kind of get together with Lord Lipsey. But just to kind of follow on from that as well, in terms of just to give an update, there was a meeting with one of the MPs that formed that cross-party kind of caucus, Jesse Norman MP for South Herefordshire. He did meet with Minister Hardy from DEFRA last week to talk about the River Wye. So I think the suggestion that obviously has been made there may be something that the Nutrient Management Board will follow up by the sounds of things. And just for reference, obviously in with the minister was ourselves, the Environment Agency, with Natural England, and we spoke about the work that we do in the Statutory Officers Group, but how we also link into the Nutrient Management Board here as well. So just to kind of join that up as well, if there is going to be a formal contact to that caucus.
Sorry to interrupt, Mark. So can I just be clear? So when you go into a meeting like that as the agency representatives, are you putting forward requests that the Nutrient Management Board need to know about? I'm specifically thinking about the funding package that they offered with the special plan for the Wye that obviously fell foul of the election. But it would be good to know if you guys are meeting them on technically on the behalf of, I presume, people that live in the Wye.
We're not meeting them on behalf of the Nutrient Management
Board. Okay.
We're meeting on behalf of ourselves as our own organisations and talking about the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
In this case, on the River Wye. So we're not representing the Nutrient Management Board. All we stated was that the Nutrient Management Board is in place and how we play our part through this kind of meeting in terms of informing information for the Nutrient Management Board itself.
Thanks very much, Mark. I mean, certainly it's great. It's great to know that that our parliamentarians are having these meetings. It would be even better if we could join up some of the communication from the Nutrient Management Board and the Wye Catchment Partnership as well, so that actually the people who are doing the doing on the ground have some sort of feed in to the whatever's going on down the road in Westminster. That would be my feeling about that. So I'm going to go with Andrew McRobb, then Councillor Charlton, and then Richard Tyler.
Thanks, Chair. My concern is really sort of echoing a little bit of Mary's point there, that we can't keep waiting. We have 4 meetings a year. The distance between those meetings and the way in which, if we're waiting for Parliament to come forward, I think is ridiculous. In so much that there's going to be far more on the government's mind than the Wye Catchment. I wouldn't mind a bet after we have the next budget. It is very much the Nutrient Management Board, the Wye Catchment Plan, the regulators. We're the people at the coalface, and we really are the only people that currently are pulling levers and making things happen. So I'd just like to emphasise we need to do this, and we need to do it regularly, more often, and harder, because we're the only ones that's going to make the difference. And I really support all the work that everyone's doing, but we've got to make it joined up, and that's where Lisa was saying it's such a shame that everyone keeps thinking they're going to form a committee or form a group or something. We've got them here. We just need to make it work. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Councillor Charlton.
Yeah, just very, very quickly, really. I agree with what's been said as well, by the way, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that in Wales, we do have a Future Generations Commissioner, and he's very much stepped into the breach here with our local devolved government around the rivers, and he is bringing together people, I think, over the next few months. And there's been a River Summit in Wales, which he was very much part of, but he's highlighted, I'm not going to go through this, but if you're interested in seeing the letter that he sent out, I'll be very happy to send it to you, Alyssa, because I think you'd be interested. He's picked out 12
we have that on the agenda. It's the next agenda item, but I completely agree with everything that you've just said.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much.
Richard Tyler.
Yeah, just to note that Friends of the River Wye and Save the Wye sat down with those, well, actually 4 MPs, one of them couldn't make it, 4 MPs representing the whole of the catchment at the end of the day, and had a very useful discussion with them about the priorities and what an APPG could do to actually take our messages forwards, particularly to ministers. So I think there's some real willingness on behalf of those MPs to battle on our behalf politically.
That's great, but with all due respect, the Friends of the River Wye are not the body statutorily charged with trying to fix this problem. No. So and it's great that they've engaged with you, and that's fabulous. But again, it's another bit of activity that's kind of going on off stage, and it's just anyway. Okay, so that's it for that agenda item. We're going to move on to agenda item 9, which is the letter that Councillor Charlton was referring to Hugh Ranker Davis. Okay, I've got a few notes about this. Overall, I think this letter shows a level of grip. There's a good level of detail. awareness of the issues. It's informed. It begs the question of where next, but nevertheless, I think for me, I thought it was very impressive. The letter takes into account the role of nutrient management boards and is seeking to find exactly the right way to take that forward in terms of funding and empowerment. So that's excellent, but it's important for us to understand what that means for us, because obviously we are a Welsh Nutrient Management Board as well as an English Nutrient Management Board. I think the emphasis on innovation is very welcome, because there are things coming through that, again, it's great that they acknowledge and they can see that, and the Welsh government is taking that seriously. The focus on the production of a clear action plan for tackling agricultural sources of river pollution is a very welcome item on that letter, as is the acknowledgement of the important work of citizen science and trying to find exactly the right way of locating that fabulous resource that that has come forward. So, yeah, overall, I thought that was a very good thing. The paper that accompanies it, looking at the role of the summits in more detail, I thought was also very good. I think the summits have been good because they show political grip and political impetus. However, it's again that Quo Vadis question of where does it go next? What's the next line in the script, which I think we're still exploring. But they've been a good thing. So I think that's excellent. And the commitment to Welsh Government is very welcome. The again, the longer paper does note that constructive working with the agricultural sector is an area yet to see progress. So there's a lot of effort going on there, but they're struggling to get traction. But it's good that again that speaks to me of information and knowledge, and actually trying to fix the problem and not duck the issue. So yeah, I thought it was a very good thing. Has anyone got any other points that they want to raise about the letter and the accompanying briefing?
Really, thank you, Chair. Really, it's that question of, so what? What happens next? Jackie Charlton mentioned some form of progress meeting or follow-on meeting that might take things forwards. Is this something which the board would be invited to, or how is that going to work?
Very happy to send it on to Alyssa, and she can have a look at it and send it out to the board. That way, it's probably the best way of doing it. But there's a, I think it's in Cardiff. Which the Future Generations Commissioner has brought together on the 21st of November. I haven't seen an agenda yet, but I have put my name down to go. And I also responded to the letter that the Future Generations Commissioner sent out on behalf of Powys County Council as well, supporting everything that he said. But if I send it to you, Alyssa, the email with all the details on, you can have a look at it. And very happy, I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine to send it out to everybody, and they can register for the event themselves.
Thank you, that's very kind.
It clashes with your conference on sustainable arable farming.
Okay. Well, that can't be helped then. But yeah, maybe other members of the board would be interested. Thank you. Has anyone got any other comments on this? Otherwise, we note it, and that's a good thing. And we'll be interested to see what the next stage is. Okay, agenda item 10, again for noting principally, is the letter from the Office for Environmental Protection to Right Honourable Steve Reed about the EIP rapid review. And I thought there were just one or two things that were worth plucking out to note. The line, in launching this review, you stated that without nature there is no economy, no food, no health or society, I thought was a pretty good line. The fact that the top priority in the range of actions that they feel are necessary, the top priority is get nature-friendly farming right. And I think that would accord with our experience in the Wye. However, again, quoting from the letter, however, we identify limited capacity for reducing water pollution, supporting your priority of cleaning up rivers and lakes, without both changes to the current schemes and changes to the regulatory approach. I wonder if any of our regulators have any insight on what changes to the regulatory approach might mean. Oh, okay. Well, yes. I mean, and I think also then priority 7, regulate more effectively. There would seem to be a theme developing in this this Office of Environmental Protection letter. I'm starting to quite like Dame Glenys Stacey, I have to say. But it's a good thing, and welcoming the recent announcement of fundamental and comprehensive review of water in the round, which is sort of an interesting idea. But again, you know, that is something to watch this space for me, to see what happens. What the other sort of things that we're kind of watching this space on, obviously, is the Wye action plan. So I'll just quickly update that because I've been reminded by my clerk that I should have done this a bit sooner. The river champion has not been reappointed as yet, so we don't quite know what's happening with that. The 35 million has not reappeared. Guessing that that'll have to wait for a spending review, so we'll just fingers crossed on that. And the other thing that you may have been aware of, that there was a desire to keep the money that's been. So am I straying onto a new agenda item? Yeah, I am. Okay, sorry. So yeah, update on the River Wye action plan. So that's the update. Is that we haven't heard anything definite. We're waiting to see. River champion's not been reappointed. 35 million. Probably spending review territory, guessing. But there are also other things in the plan, like the permitting. And again, I haven't heard anything. I don't know if any of our regulators have heard anything about any of that. No. So it's just completely at a stop. If anyone hears anything, could they please let us know? Okay, so Andrew McRobb and then Richard Tyler.
Alyssa, just to pick up on the Office for Environmental Protection letter, I thought that was really excellent and moving in the right direction. Certainly we're in support of much of what's said been in that letter, and CPRE are already about to embark on seeing if we can encourage the Environment Agency to get the same powers that they have with the water companies to be mirrored in what they do with agriculture. So they've just been given powers where they've got more ability to fine water companies, and we would like to see that to be moved over into the agricultural industry for two reasons. One, I think if they had teeth and could fine people, I think that the noise would spread very quickly, and you might find you'll get a lot more regulatory compliance. And secondly, I think it would do their morale good, because I think that if the public could see that something was happening, rather than currently if I put a freedom of information request in, I find out that there's only been 2 people prosecuted in the last 10 years in agriculture. So I just think that it would help them, and I'm pretty sure that we would benefit from it, because at the moment I've just read the catchment statistics on pollution, and in that it's very clear to see that somewhere like on the south coast, where they've been trying to work with the farming community, they've got no indication whether that's provided any improvement whatsoever. So I think it does go to show that we do need stick and carrot. We do need to encourage farmers. We do need to work collaboratively with them, but they also need to know that that they've got to play the game. So I'm all in favour of that report, and certainly CPRE are going to be lobbying to see if the EA can get similar powers for agriculture as that they have for the water companies.
Richard Tyler?
Only really just to back up what you said, we've heard positively through the MPs actually that it definitely depends on the spending review, but who knows about all the other actions within it that are not financially related. I don't know. We've very much picked up the same issue that CPRE has, and really we want to see it applied in Wales as well. So that's a cross-border thing which needs to be sorted out between ministers.
Mary Albright?
I don't know how this works, but isn't there a route for us to lobby the Treasury regarding a spending review? So I think Jesse Norman raised it in Parliament, and he was told that it was a spending review decision. But what they might think is, because we've not made much noise about the funding for the special plan, that we're not that bothered because we criticised how it was being spent. But that doesn't mean we didn't want the money. We just didn't think it was being spent very wisely. Can't the Nutrient Management Board write to the Treasury to say that we are expecting it? There is another reason why they owe us that money, in that Herefordshire is caught in this devolution gap. And so currently we are not aligned with our English counterparts, nor are we aligned with our Welsh counterparts. So they, in theory, need a way of balancing out the illegality of the devolution split. So we could write to the Treasury. If you don't write, then how are the Treasury going to know it's important? Just because they had it before, a different government, different colour. I don't mind how we go about it, but I think we should write.
Okay, has anyone else got a view on that proposal? I'm very happy to second that proposal. Yeah, we're all happy with that. Okay, that's agreed then.
I did think it might help Anne if we also wrote to say that Natural Resources Wales shouldn't be defunded, and that if they are, that it shouldn't be a kind of a river water defunding. But if Anne wants to let me know if she wants me to lobby anybody in Wales, I'm happy to do that as well. Might as well be a nuisance for the next 5 years, like the last 5 years.
Chair, can I just ask, is there an issue that any form of lobbying on behalf of the Nutrient Management Board does put statutory bodies into a difficult situation? Because I'm not sure they can lobby. I'd just like to raise that point.
Not lobbying then, just write a letter.
So I think where we agreed previously when we reviewed the governance is that we would be a non-voting member of the board, so any representation made in that capacity would exclude the regulatory bodies. So the board can agree to do that, but it would be outside of, as you would expect, the statutory organisations.
I think we agree.
Fine, do that then. That's great, thank you. Good suggestion, thanks, Mary. Have we got any more on that? Okay, so the you raised the bit about fines. Obviously, we've got that on the agenda as well. And I'll look to Daniel to also bring more detail into this. But what was on my mind principally was that I had understood that the fines levied against water companies would be ring-fenced to be spent for river restoration proximal to the damage. So within the catchment where the event has taken place, and that in fact our MP Jesse Norman was one of the MPs who'd got that agreement in place, but the money is now going into Treasury. So that's, the total sort of nationally would be what, 160, 170 million. It's quite a lot now, I think, that's accrued. Which I think is a shame. So I mean that might be something that we would want to take up. But the more local point of view, I will pass over to Daniel to give us some insight on the Welsh water situation.
Thank you. So in terms of, it's called kind of enforcement undertaking. So in terms of what I'm aware of, kind of it applies for any company that's got a permit with Environment Agency, and so on. So not just necessarily with the water company on our part. So where that would normally apply is kind of if there was a non-compliance failure that was identified, and we'd highlight that to the regulator, or a high impact pollution incident or so on that kind of had a real significant or a major impact on a watercourse. The normal routine would be for that then to be a prosecution, going to courts, and the fines then kind of, that's where kind of the money would end up is in, you know, it would be paid and kind of that would go to the Treasury. There is an enforcement undertaking rule where the company can voluntarily offer to pay a substantial amount of money, whatever they deem kind of, which is likely to be equivalent to kind of the fine anyway. And then kind of that would be engaging in the project kind of with a ENGO or a Rivers Trust or a Wildlife Trust to do a project in that particular catchment. The agreement needs to be made then as a legal binding agreement between the regulator and whatever business or offender that is. And basically the money, you know, and the project goes into place kind of in that particular catchment. So yeah, there's a few examples on EA's website in terms of various companies and various kind of enforcement undertakings that have carried out over the last year or so. But those are the main principles around it, kind of highlighting that side of things.
But this is not the same as the kind of multi-million pound fines that are being levied against particularly the southern companies, water companies, which is going to Treasury. As this is kind of local, these are settlements you're talking about.
Yes, yeah. So I guess any water company or any business would do that kind of directly, then kind of like a legal proceeding, you know, kind of with the agency.
So Martin, did you want to come in?
So there are different rules for a Welsh water company than an English water company. So, for example, enforcement undertakings, as Dan's just mentioned, apply to England. So effectively, it's another enforcement tool in terms of anybody who causes the pollution can apply for an enforcement undertaking. It goes through a robust process. So effectively, it's a calculated amount that would represent the fine. But the difference is the money can go to environmental causes. So, for example, you'll see Wildlife Trusts apply for enforcement undertakings in terms of that money that's available, and effectively they would build that money and use that money to develop projects. What I think you're referring to is the Water Restoration Fund, which is the fund that was announced under the previous government, where fines from water companies go into environmental causes, so therefore it goes back to the catchments. Now, my understanding is it doesn't apply to Welsh water companies. Okay, so there is a slight discrepancy in terms of what applies on the Wye versus, to say, what applies on the Severn, which is an English water company.
Of course. Nevertheless, I think that there's a point to be made about the national picture as well. So yeah, Anne Weedy.
Yeah, and again, just to try and sort of explain that a little bit more. So there is a provision for us to accept enforcement undertakings in Wales, but not under the same legislation as in England. So EPR is what we call it, which is the main legislation that we use around sort of pollution incidents and spills. So there is no provision in Wales under EPR to accept an enforcement undertaking. So it doesn't matter whether that's Welsh Water or Hafren Dyfrdwy or any of the other water companies. If the pollution incident happened in Wales, then we couldn't, there is no provision for an enforcement undertaking in Wales in the same way as there is for England under the EPR legislation. We have accepted them under where there's potentially damage to a fishery. So under the Salmon and Freshwater Fisheries Act, we can accept them under SAFA. So there's other ways we can accept them, but again, it's the same process, that rigorous process around sort of making that decision as to whether it's appropriate to accept an EU. And then just to follow on that, River Restoration Fund, I do believe is also that there isn't a difference between England and Wales for the River Restoration Fund. It's only for EUs or enforcement undertakings, that there's that difference, and it is complicated. So I'm not sure that helped.
Thanks. I'm not sure it helped either, but thank you very much for the. It is complicated. Yes, it is. It always seems to be that whatever applies, it doesn't apply here. But
Effectively, there's no money coming. Don't rely on that. But in theory, we shouldn't be expecting, or we shouldn't be wishing that there would be money coming from pollution incidences from anybody with a permit. So, you know, on the upside, again, I must be in a good mood today. The fact that there isn't any money must mean that people aren't doing things wrong, sort of. Even if they were, there's no money for it for Herefordshire.
Andrew McRobb.
Can I just comment that I think, cutting to the chase, because I'm a really simple guy, Welsh Water got fined £21 million the other day. Where's that money gone? It would be nice to have had, you know, £100,000 of that to help our citizen science projects. I think that's where you're getting at, Lisa. Big fines, where does it go?
Yeah, Daniel.
I'm not sure kind of where the £21 million, which particular kind of incident that was linked to or works, but I know kind of there are certain sites kind of in Herefordshire, for example, where our legal team are currently pulling together some non-compliances, so we will be applying for emergency undertaking in this particular catchment. However, it's with legal, so I can't kind of disclose any more information at the moment. But there are things there, you know, that we are trying to undertake in that sense. And you know, from Welsh Water's perspective, yes, we'd prefer. You know, we don't want any non-compliances and we don't want any pollution incidents. That's very clear. But if there is anything to happen, we would prefer the money to be going back into that river catchment for you to restore the damage that's been caused, you know. So we'd much prefer that to happen rather than the money going away to the Treasury and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. That was actually surprisingly useful intervention. Thank you. An interesting conversation. I think something that I hadn't been cited on before. I think we've all learnt quite a lot. Thank you. Councillor Maybe.
Just a quick thing. Yeah, there is precedent for fines being used for prevention and support measures through the energy redress scheme, which uses the fines that energy companies pay when they haven't met standards for how they treat customer service, and that money goes to support people in schemes to support people in fuel poverty. So there's precedent for that. I thought a long time ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was discussion of creating something similar within water in the UK. But there is certainly mechanisms and precedent for doing that as regards utilities.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, it seems like a good idea, the River Restoration Fund or whatever, Water Restoration Fund. It's kind of feels poetic, feels the right thing to do. Anyway, we'll see. It's not in our gift, unfortunately. But there we go. Has anyone got anything further on that? In which case, we shall move along to agenda item 12, which is the date of the next meeting. And the next scheduled meeting is Wednesday, the 15th of January at 2 o'clock. So thank you all for your attendance. Please can we stop the live feed?